Climate Law Matters, the campaigner behind the most significant climate case of this century so far. Part 2, Implications of the decision in Finch. Hello listener, and welcome back to our podcast, Climate Law Matters, in which we explore the legal developments across different sectors to address the key issue of climate change. I am Steph David, a barrister at 39 Essex Chambers, specialising in environmental and climate change cases. Today I continue my discussion with Sarah Finch of the Wheeled Action Group. As I'm sure many of you know, Sarah brought the pivotal judicial review challenge to the decision of Surrey County Council to grant planning permission for oil production at Horse Hill in Surrey. And the Supreme Court handed down its decision earlier this year. And this is the second part of my interview with Sarah. And in this part, we discuss the broader implications of the Supreme Court's decision. Sarah, so my first question is, what's particularly exciting and in some ways quite unusual is the fact that even though this decision was only handed down in June, there have been almost immediate direct effects of this case on other fossil fuel projects. Can you set out what the impacts of the case have been since June?
Yes, it's been hugely gratifying to see the wider impacts already. I had said all along that this case could have important ramifications if we won, but I don't think I ever imagined it coming through so quickly. So the first indications came in July when the government conceded that the planned coal mine in Cumbria had been permitted unlawfully on the grounds of not having taken account of the emissions from the combustion of the coal, and it wouldn't defend that decision in court. So that was a permission made by Michael Gove, in which he had quoted my High Court judgment as part of the justification for allowing a new coal mine. So the government decided not to defend that decision, and then the hearing went ahead, and in December, the planning permission for the mine was quashed. So, back in July again, an onshore oil development at Biscathorpe in Lincolnshire also found unlawful on the same grounds. And there are more onshore oil and gas sites sort of going through the process that I hope will be affected in the same way. But then in August came the government's announcement that it wouldn't defend the decisions for the Jackdaw and Rosebank offshore oil and gas fields in the North Sea, which were themselves the subject of separate legal cases. So the hearing into those starts on the 12th of November. The oil companies involved, gas companies, will be defending it, but the government not. So I hope that those also will be found unlawful. And the offshore petroleum regulator, OPRED, has announced that it's deferring the assessment of any new environmental statements relating to oil and gas extraction and storage until the government has issued new guidance on environmental impact assessment following my win. And it also applies to oil and gas environmental statements that are already being assessed. So I just find that incredible. All those North Sea oil and gas fields on hold, thanks to our fight over small, tiny, in comparison, site in Surrey.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, it just shows how important the legal point is. And it's certainly interesting you say that Rosebank and Jackdaw, the developers, are still pursuing the case, and it's due to be heard in November. Just for the Whitehaven one, the same thing happened. I mean, the developer ultimately tried to defend the decision in the High Court, and Mr. Justice Holgate held that it was unlawful on the basis, essentially, of your decisions.
And I heard just yesterday that the coal mine company haven't appealed. The deadline for appeal has passed and they haven't submitted an appeal. So they seem to have accepted that unlawful.
That is interesting. So I think the very last coal mine closed in the UK very recently, was at the end of September. So it really is quite a pivotal time, isn't it, in terms of fossil fuel in this country?
Definitely the coal era is over and everyone accepts that. But I think the oil and gas era is on its way out too.
Sarah, I'm kind of curious to understand what you think the broader impact of your decision will be in terms of on other sectors.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about how the judgment affects other sectors. The Lord Legate in the judgment did make it clear that this was a specific case about fossil fuel production. And I think he did that because there'd been speculation in the High Court, particularly about, well, where would this end? Everything's an indirect impact of something else. It's completely unworkable. So he was limiting it. No, it's very clear if you're producing fossil fuels and the only purpose is to burn them, that the combustion emissions are an effect of that development. So it's difficult to know until cases come to court, but it has been raised. So already it's been raised in connection with the building of a new runway at Gatwick Airport, which would enable the number of flights to double. So the planning inspectorate, who were looking at the development consent order for Gatwick, they specifically asked for submissions on the relevance or otherwise of my Supreme Court judgment on that case. And I've seen discussion among lawyers and campaigners on how it applies to applications for intensive livestock farming, because an inevitable result of that is the manure produced by those thousands or even millions of animals. That's an inevitable result. So I've also had people asking about its possible relevance to things like large house building schemes. If a large number of houses are built somewhere far away from any connection to public transport, are the inevitable sort of vehicle journeys to and from those new homes indirect impacts of building them? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. And I think until these cases come to court, we can't know how they will play out. But I do think that there's some good statements in my judgment about how you work out what is an effect of something or not. So I hope, indirect results of developments do have to be taken into account in EIA. That's established.
Yes, I think building on that point, I mean, what is really interesting is the Supreme Court ultimately actually agreed that it wasn't a matter of planning judgment. And so that is a kind of big change. It is ultimately a question of causation, and that would apply, as you say, across the board, not just to fossil fuel developments. Sarah, so what lessons have you learned from bringing this case, including any practical considerations?
Well, I guess the first thing I learned is that using the law is very expensive. Even though we had a sort of cut prices from our lawyers and we had the cost protection from the Aarhus Convention, we still raised £65,000 all told for the High Court and Court of Appeal stages. And then we were very grateful indeed when the Fund and Law for Change offered to pay for the cost of the Supreme Court stage. So £65,000 is a lot to raise for a small group, and it took a lot of energy to do that. And I think we had a lot of support from local people around Horse Hill and people in the wider climate movement, but that could be a barrier to many groups having to raise that kind of money. And I also learned that the law is very slow. So I think I went into this imagining it would all be over in 6 months, but we got knocked back several times. So our application for judicial review was refused twice. So we went to the Court of Appeal for permission to continue. Then we lost in the High Court. We had to wait another year for the Court of Appeal, lost again, and 18 months wait. So it's basically almost 5 years from starting out on the journey to getting a result. So really slow, and that can be demoralizing. And luckily, we had a really good group of people working on it in the Wheeled Action Group, and our lawyers were lovely people, really supportive and great to work with. But yeah, it's not a way to get fast results, definitely. And there's also no guarantee that you will get the result that you want. And I feel hugely lucky. There's a danger of setting an unhelpful precedent and actually making things worse, which happened with my High Court judgment. So when Michael Gove quoted the High Court judgment on my case as part of the justification for approving the first new coal mine in decades, I was really devastated, and I just felt maybe I'd made a stupid mistake doing this, etc. A terrible moment. So I'm really glad that coal mines now have been found unlawful. So yeah, the law's not a guaranteed route to success, but really powerful if you do win.
Just picking up on that point about your kind of determination and the fact that you stuck with this for essentially half a decade. I mean, what tips would you give to those that are inspired by your action in taking the case as far as you did?
Well, if anyone was going to embark on that route and take a case, I would say just make sure that you have lots of people around you to encourage you. It's not all on you. And make sure that you like and trust your lawyers, which I really did. I just felt they were really on side and doing it out of passion as much as we were, and always felt able to ask them questions, didn't feel embarrassed about asking silly ones, etc. So yeah, I think it's really important that you've got the right people around you. But I'd also say litigation isn't the only tool, and we need people acting on like every front to fend off the climate emergency. So I think what I would say to people, I know I feel, who am I to give anyone advice about anything? But I would say whatever you're interested in and like doing, do that for the climate. It doesn't have to be legal cases. It doesn't have to be anything. We need everybody to do what you do and do it for the climate.
Finally, Sarah, so the question I ask all my guests, what do you see as the greatest barrier or development in addressing climate change?
The greatest barrier is the way that all our governments really are so in bed with the fossil fuel industry. So we know, it's absolutely not controversial to say that we need to end new fossil fuel production. We need to wind down coal-powered electricity generation all over the world. We need to massively invest in renewable energy and energy efficiency. But all over the world, companies are still seeking and getting permission for new mines and production fields. And that just has to stop. So politicians need to be brave, and they need to listen to the science, and they need to listen to the communities they represent. We have their back on this. I think by and large, the ordinary people know that we need to change and we need to transition away. And it's so frustrating to see the governments being so slow on that.
Thank you, Sarah. That's all we have time for today. But thank you very much for your time. It's been great to hear from you and hear your views on your case.